Aloha everyone! Welcome to the next chapter that we are going to cover in unit number 2. Today we are going to begin our discussion of chapter 6, and chapter 6 in your text is bones and skeletal tissue. So today, technically we're going to have 2 lectures. So what you're watching right now is lecture for chapter 6A, and then there will be a separate lecture for chapter 6B. So this again is chapter 6A, bones and skeletal tissue. So hopefully, because you're in an anatomy and physiology class, you're not wondering why we're talking about bones. Like, you would have expected to talk about bones in this class, right? But I want to start off by going over why understanding bone formation and bone health matters. So first of all, understanding bone anatomy and the process of bone remodeling allows you to work effectively with patients if you go into the clinical setting. So working with patients that have bone diseases such as osteoporosis or with bone injuries such as fractures. Secondly, understanding bone physiology helps you to make appropriate choices with nutrition, physical activity, and other behaviors to maintain positive bone health. So I can tell you just from being, once upon a time, a collegiate athlete, I had 7 stress fractures. And it got so bad with my tibia stress fractures that I actually fractured my femur because my tibias were so weak that the femurs were also just taking a lot of that stress and trying to make up for the tibias being so weak. And I wish back then that I had the knowledge about bone formation, bone fractures, stress fractures are specifically what I had because I was a collegiate runner, running, like 60 to 100 miles a week. So a lot of stress on your bones. And I wish I would have known what I know now about bones. So that's just one example of how knowing about bone formation and bone health really matters. For you, this is your body, right? And you really need to pay attention to it in order to live your everyday life, and then also just for this clinical setting as well. So we could look at this chapter from a purely scientific point of view, but we aren't going to. We are actually going to look and think about our bone health and how it really connects to our overall health as a living human organism. So I hope that learning more about chapter 6 is not just something that you're doing as part of this class, but also something that you're able to make applicable to your daily life as well. So here you see our learning outcomes for today. So we want to describe the major functions of the skeletal system, use microscopic images to distinguish between the 3 different types of cartilage. If you remember, we did this back in chapter 4, so this should be a little bit of a review. Then we want to describe the locations of the 3 types of cartilage and skeletal muscle, describe the roles of dense regular and dense irregular connective tissue in the skeletal system, and classify bones of the skeleton based on their location and shape. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here is the plan for today. And I say today relatively because you're watching these lectures, right? But for today, technically, if we were in a class setting, we would have 2 lectures. This lecture, which is chapter 6A, where we're going to discuss the basics. So we're going to review the types of cartilage, right? We're going to look at the function of bone and bone classification as well. Then in lecture chapter 6B, which will be the next lecture, should be right below this one on your Lalima page, you will see that we're going to discuss the gross, micro, and chemical anatomy of bones. Then in a later lecture, we're going to cover chapter 6C that is going to talk about bone development. So again, plan for today, we're going to look at cartilage, the functions of bone, and bone classification. So a lot of times our skeletal system does not get enough credit. I think people just view it as bones, right? But really, there are many functions that our skeletal system has. Our skeletal system is responsible for support, for protection, for movement, for mineral and growth factor storage, for blood cell formation. So for example, hematopoiesis, sorry, I just messed up that word. That is the process of blood cell formation. And we also have triglyceride, or in other words, your fat storage. And we have hormone production as well. So for example, osteocalcin, this is a type of hormone that's actually found in bone as well as dentin. So we're not going to look at all of these functions today, but by the time we get through talking about the skeletal system, hopefully you'll see that it's a lot more than just our support, right? We have a lot of functions of the skeletal system. So we're going to be going over the different skeletal system structures and how they contribute to all of these functions. Our skeleton actually comes from cartilage. So we move from cartilage into our bone discussion. So as a reminder, skeletal cartilage, the human skeleton, initially consists of just cartilage, and it's very highly resilient. Cartilage eventually, like I just said, is going to be replaced by bone, except for in areas that require flexibility. Cartilage, if you remember back from chapter 4, is a type of connective tissue, right? And skeletal cartilage in adults, we find it in 3 different forms. There's hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibro cartilage. So you may remember, hopefully you remember, back in chapter 4 that I actually mentioned these 3 types of cartilage and their structure and function. On the next few slides, we're actually going to do a little bit of a review. We're going to cover these 3 types of cartilage just to kind of remind you about the differences between the 3 and some different areas that you would find these 3 types of cartilage. So as kind of a reminder, we can use microscopic images, right, in order to distinguish between the 3 different types of cartilage. And these images should look familiar to you, these ones that we cover on the next few slides, because again, they were introduced to you in chapter 4. And as a reminder, when we talk about connective tissue, most of our connective tissues are going to be composed primarily of that extracellular matrix, or that ECM, and also cells. So you can see this matrix, this is that extracellular matrix, right? So as a reminder, hyaline cartilage is going to provide support, flexibility, and resilience. It is the most abundant type of cartilage in our bodies, and it contains collagen fibers only. So it has a glassy appearance, as you can see. And this right here, as a reminder, this is a photomicrograph. And you can see these chondrocytes right here. That's a cell that you see. And this is actually from the costal cartilage of a rib. So you can see right here, coming from the ribs right there. That's called costal cartilage. So it's going to connect your ribs to your sternum. Some other areas that you would find hyaline cartilage would be the cartilages of the nose region, the trachea, and your larynx as well. So again, if you see this kind of glassy appearance, you can see this extracellular matrix, chondrocytes, that's going to be your hyaline cartilage. And here you can actually see highlighted in blue the different types of hyaline cartilage that we have in our bodies. So as I mentioned, we have that costal cartilage, right? You have the cartilages in your nose. Here in blue as well, you can see your trachea region has that costal cartilage, and also your larynx region as well. And again, this hyaline cartilage is going to provide support, flexibility, and resilience. So we have articular cartilage. You can see that right here. That's going to be found in the joint regions. We have costal cartilage, which again is the ribs, respiratory cartilage in the larynx, and the nasal cartilage, which is in the nose tip. So those are some of the common areas in our body where you're going to find this hyaline cartilage. Then the second type of cartilage that we have is elastic cartilage. So elastic cartilage is very similar to hyaline cartilage, but it contains more than just collagen fibers. So remember, hyaline cartilage only contains collagen fibers. Elastic cartilage is also going to contain elastic fibers. Although it is quite flexible, it can actually still tear whenever excessive force is applied. So such as when the ears are impacted during contact sports. When that heals imperfectly, you may have heard the term cauliflower ear before. It's a really puffy appearance. That's from this elastic cartilage being damaged. So elastic cartilage is going to be highly resilient to movement. It's avascular, which means it has limited healing. So one of the areas we find this is in our ears. That's why piercing your ears doesn't hurt very much, because there's not many nerves there. So you can see here, again, this extracellular matrix, but notice these dark purple fibers that you did not see with the hyaline cartilage. That's going to be your elastic fibers. And again, you see the cell types, these chondrocytes right here. So that is your elastic cartilage. This is actually showing you a photomicrograph of the human ear pinna. So it's going to form that flexible skeleton of the ear. So this figure should look familiar. We looked at this. The areas in blue again are the hyaline cartilage. This time we're going to look though at the areas that are highlighted in green, because the green areas show you areas of elastic cartilage. So besides the ear, remember the cartilage in that external ear is going to be this elastic cartilage. We also find elastic cartilage in the epiglottis. So you can see that right here. And your epiglottis is going to be the flap of cartilage that's right above your larynx. And that's going to be depressed whenever you're swallowing and then opened whenever you're inhaling. So pretty much it separates the intake of food versus air in our bodies. So that's going to be the two major areas we see elastic cartilage, the external ear and the epiglottis. Then for that third type of cartilage, we have fibrocartilage. So this has very thick collagen fibers, and you may remember, you actually had a picture of this if you're taking lab with me. It was in your asynchronous lab. I know at least one person had trouble with that image because it was a little different than this one. But what you always look at in terms of fibrocartilage is some very thick fibers. So here you can see some thick fibers, right? So those are your thick collagen fibers. So if you see a photomicrograph, you want to look for these thicker looking fibers. They're not stringy like in that last figure of elastic cartilage. They're much thicker. So that would tell you it's fibrocartilage, and that's probably collagen fibers. So this has great tensile strength. It's very strong, so it's going to be found in areas such as our intervertebral discs and our knees. And if you think of those two areas of our body, right, they're going to take on a lot of force, right? So this fibrocartilage is going to function as a shock absorber, allowing very small amounts of movement to occur between adjacent bones. So again, you see these chondrocytes, you can see this matrix all around, and then these very thick collagen fibers in this photomicrograph. And this actually came from an intervertebral disc. So if you think of your spine, those discs there, then you're going to have cartilage in between each one of those, again, to function as a shock absorber. So this time you want to focus on the areas that are highlighted in red, because those are going to be areas of fibrocartilage. So the first one here that you see is the pubic symphysis. This is a cartilage joint that is between the left and right pelvic bones. So you can see that right here highlighted in red. That's going to have fibrocartilage. We also have the meniscus, which if you've ever torn your meniscus, you definitely know what this is. But the meniscus is a pad-like cartilage that is very rubbery, and it acts as a shock absorber. And it can be torn during very quick movements. And then again, you're going to find the cartilage in your intervertebral disc. You can see how it's in between each one of those areas, right? Again, very strong, acting as a shock absorber. So that's going to be your fibrocartilage. Now that we've covered the 3 different types of cartilage, I want to mention that all skeletal cartilage, regardless of the type, is going to have a protective barrier around it known as a perichondrium. So the perichondrium, peri means around, chondros means cartilage. So the perichondrium is going to surround cartilage kind of like a girdle. So it's made up of dense, irregular connective tissue, and it has bundles of very thick collagen. It's vascular, so if you remember, vascular means that it's going to have blood vessels in it, right? So the blood vessels are used for nutrient delivery to that cartilage, and it's used for growth and repair for the cartilage. So it's going to have this thick collagen in it to provide the strength, and it also allows, again, because it's vascular, it allows for the nutrients to get to the cartilage. So I have over here a picture of irregular connective tissue, and the reason why is because, again, this perichondrium is made up of irregular connective tissue. So this perichondrium is kind of like a support function for the cartilage, and then it's also allowing the nutrients to get to the cartilage, because the cartilage needs that nutrients to be able to grow and to repair. Otherwise, it would just disintegrate, which we know it happens with use, right? But it would happen a lot sooner if we didn't have this perichondrium surrounding the skeletal cartilage. So I mentioned that we need that perichondrium, right, to provide those nutrients, to have that blood vessel flow to the cartilage, because cartilage needs to grow. How exactly does cartilage grow, though? That's what we're going to talk about here on this slide. So cartilage can actually grow in 2 different ways. So first of all, we can have appositional, sorry about that. This is increasing in width. So the chondroblasts are going to deposit matrix on the surface of the pre-existing cartilage. So you can see here how your cells are getting wider. So we're increasing in width. That's appositional cartilage growth. The second type of growth we can have is interstitial. This is increasing in length, right? So those chondrocytes are going to divide, and they're going to secrete the matrix from within the lacunae. So you can see here, instead of getting wider, these chondrocytes are getting longer, and they're actually dividing, right? So it's going to increase this direction, whereas appositional, it increases this way. So appositional is going to get thicker and thicker, whereas interstitial is going to spread and get longer. So those are the 2 different types of ways that cartilage can grow. This slide here covers some of the differences between bones and cartilage. So cartilage is going to be a specialized form of connective tissue, right? It's one of the types of connective tissue that we covered back in chapter 4. The cells are going to be embedded in an extracellular matrix. It's very thin. Cartilage is avascular, so it does not have those blood vessels. It's very flexible, kind of semi-rigid, so providing some of that support, right? It's resistant to compressive forces, and it forms a template for growth and the development of long bones. Whereas our bones, they are also a specialized form of connective tissue, right? So they also have cells embedded in the extracellular matrix. So if I was to ask you, hey, what's one similarity between bones and cartilage? You would say, well, they're both specialized forms of connective tissue, and they have cells embedded in that extracellular matrix, because all connective tissue has that. But that's kind of where the similarities end. So bone is going to be thick rather than cartilage, which was thin. It's going to be vascular, meaning it has blood vessel supply, versus cartilage, which was avascular. It's going to be very strong and it's hard and calcified. And it's resistant to bending, twisting, compression, and stretch. So you can see that while there is a similarity here between bones and cartilage, there are also a lot of differences, right? Bones are going to be much thicker, they're vascular, they're going to be calcified, and they're resistant to a lot of bending and twisting, compression, and stretch. So I always find it interesting whenever I talk to people about bones, because bones are technically organs. And that's generally where I lose people. So they're like, wait, no, our bones are not organs. Well, why do you think bones are organs? Any guesses? So what is an organ? An organ is where you have different types of tissues coming together, right? And that's exactly what we see with bones. So bones are made up of osseous tissue. So bone or osseous tissue is going to predominate in a bone, but that's not all that we see. We see other tissue types coming together to form a bone too. So bones, again, are going to have that osseous tissue. Can't really see it that well. It's not actually pointed out here, but they have the osseous tissue. The majority of this is going to be that osseous tissue. They also have nervous tissue though. They have cartilage, right? There's fibrous connective tissue. There are muscle cells, and there are also epithelial cells in the bone as well. So you have a lot of different tissue types coming together to form bone, which is why bone is considered an organ. So you may wonder, how do the bones of our skeleton actually stay held together? Well, that's where our tendons and ligaments come into play. So these are made up of dense, regular connective tissue. I actually mentioned this back in chapter 4 when we were talking about dense, regular connective tissue. Hopefully this picture kind of looks familiar to you, right? You see these collagen fibers here. You can see the fibroblasts. You can see the nuclei of them. So dense, regular connective tissue has very high tensile strength. And there are closely packed bundles of thick collagen fibers that are running parallel to each other. You can see that here, right? And remember, because this is dense and regular, there's not much space in there. These bundles of collagen are packed very tight together. So this provides a great resistance to pulling. So this dense, regular connective tissue is what our tendons and ligaments are made out of. And those tendons and ligaments are going to hold the bones together and give them their needed flexibility to be pushed and pulled. Okay, next we're going to look at a classification of bones. And bones can be classified two different ways. They can be classified based on their location, or they can be classified based on their shape. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at these two different types of classification. When we talk about bones and their classification by location, hopefully these figures look familiar to you because we actually covered this back in chapter 1. So there are 206 named bones in the human skeleton. And again, they're divided into two different groups based on their location. We have the axial skeleton, which we talked about before. It kind of forms the axis of the human body, right? It's this long axis of the body. It's going to be the skull, your vertebral column, and the rib cage, right? So again, skull, your vertebral column, and your rib cage. That's going to make up that axial skeleton. Then we have the appendicular skeleton, and think of that as kind of your appendages, right? So it's going to be the bones of your upper and lower limbs. So your arms, your upper limbs, your legs, your lower limbs. And then it's also going to be the girdles, like your pelvic girdle, that is attaching your limbs to the axial skeleton. So if we are classifying bones based on location, we talk about them in regards to our axial skeleton versus our appendicular skeleton. Another way that we can classify bones is also by their shape, right? And we haven't talked about this before, so this is going to be a little bit new to you. Maybe you've talked about it in another class. But we're going to go through some of these different shapes of bones. So first of all, you can have a long bone, like you see here in A. So a long bone is one that is cylindrical in shape. It is longer than it is wide, right? So keep in mind, however, that the term long bone is referring to the shape of the bone, not its size. So you can have long bones that are found in your upper limbs, such as your humerus, your ulna, and your radius, and your lower limbs, so your femur, your tibia, your fibula, as well as in your hands, so your metacarpals and phalanges, and our feet as well. Our metatarsals and phalanges there as well. So long bones are going to function as kind of these rigid bars that move whenever the muscles contract. We can also have, as you see in here, B, irregular bones. And an irregular bone is one that does not have any easily characterized shape and therefore does not really fit any other classification. So these bones tend to be more complex shapes, kind of, think of the vertebra, right? They're going to support the spinal cord and they protect it from compressive forces. We also have many bones in our face, particularly our jaw bones that contain teeth. They're also classified as irregular bones. So they just don't fit into a particular type of shape, so they're called irregular bones. We also have our flat bones, as you see here in C. So the term flat bone is somewhat of a misnomer because although a flat bone is typically thin, it is also often curved. So some examples are going to include our cranial or our skull bones, the scapulae, which are going to be our shoulder blades, the sternum or the breastbone, and the ribs. So flat bones are going to kind of serve as points of attachment for muscles, and they're often going to protect internal organs. We also have sesamoid bones, as you see right here. This is a small round bone that's going to form in tendons. So sesamo means sesame and oid means resembling. So if you remember, we talked about this a couple slides ago, but tendons are dense connective tissue that connect bone and they connect bones to muscles. And the sesamoid bones are going to form wherever a great deal of pressure is going to be generated in a joint. So the sesamoid bone, what it does is it's actually going to protect the tendon by helping them to overcome the excessive forces, but it also allows the tendons and their attached muscles to be more effective. So sesamoid bones are going to vary in number and placement from person to person, but they're typically found in tendons that are associated with the feet, hands, and as you see here, the knee. The last kind of shape of bone that I'm going to cover here is our short bones. And a short bone is one that is kind of cube-like in shape. It's being what I mean by cube-like, I know this doesn't look like a cube, but it's approximately equal in length, width, and thickness. The only short bones in the human skeleton are going to be in the carpals of our wrists and the tarsals of our ankles. So short bones are going to provide stability and support as well as some limited motion. So these are the different terms that we'll use when we're classifying bones by shape. So again, we have our long bones, irregular bones, flat bones, your sesamoid, this is a specialized type of short bone, and your short bones as well. Okay, so the reason why we have 2 lectures scheduled for today is because this was a short one, right? So we just covered the basics. We did a little bit of a review on the different types of cartilage. We talked about the 2 different ways that cartilage can actually grow, right? And then we talked about the functions of bone and bone classification. We can classify it based on its location. So if it's axial or appendicular, we can also classify them based on shape. So go ahead if you want, take a break. You don't even have to watch lecture chapter 6B today. You can do it another day this week if you want, but this was a short one, so make sure that you also watch lecture on chapter 6B, where we're going to actually cover the anatomy, the gross anatomy, the microanatomy, and the chemical anatomy of bones. Mahalo.